All right, viewers, we're going to start off the bulletin with live shots that we're getting from the temple complex, which is right there in Ayodhya. Take a look at what's happening on ground. There we see the temple, of course, and a lot of people have gathered. Several guests from across the country are making their way to Ayodhya for the consecration ceremony, which is scheduled to take place a few hours from now, 12:20 p.m. to be precise. And of course, the Indian Prime Minister will be in attendance for that. We are still awaiting the Prime Minister's arrival. At the moment, these are shots from the temple that you're getting.
And of course, sentiment is high across India and beyond. And for more on this, we're being joined by our colleague, Molly Gambhir. Molly, thank you so much for joining us. Of course, to begin with, what can you tell us of the mood on ground? What can you tell us of the mood on ground, the people there? Of course, I'm sure Ayodhya is all decked up for the pran prathishtha, which is scheduled for 12:20 p.m.
We're still trying to get through to Molly. She's right there on ground and will be getting us latest from there throughout the day. Of course, as of now, we're going to first cut across to our guest who's joining us on the broadcast, who's being joined by renowned historian and journalist Hindol Sengupta with more details on the consecration and the temple's construction. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you very much. Delighted to join.
Sir, thank you so much for joining us. Of course, it's a momentous day. What are the most significant narratives, I want to ask you from your journalistic standpoint, what are the most significant narratives surrounding the consecration that you think need to be highlighted, you know, the cultural significance of the Ram Mandir in the contemporary Indian society?
I don't have a journalistic viewpoint because I have long ceased to be a journalist, but I do have a historical viewpoint as a historian, and allow me to share that with you. Look, I mean, if you think about modern nation states, they go through various phases. In some, literature, we call them different republics, so to speak, right? And today is India's beginning of its second republic, so to speak. The first republic was inaugurated when it won independence, which is the foundation of the modern Indian Democratic Republic. Today is the second republic because today India begins its journey in a sense as a civilizational state. It has always been a civilizational state, but somehow in its body politic, in its institutions, that was not adequately represented or reflected. I think today begins India's real journey as a civilizational state. It was never the Western nation state at all, because at the end of the day, it has a very long civilization and history, and that needs to reflect in its statehood, so to speak, or its nationhood. And I think today is that moment where there is a clear representation, there is a clear structure and a framework that adequately represents India as a civilizational state. Now, many things will change because of this. The way Indians look at themselves, the way the world looks at India, the way Indian institutions respond. We are moving into a different framework of thinking, and I think that needs to be understood. When such events happen, such epochal events happen in the country doesn't remain the same anymore. We have to understand that as India rises, this is an inflection point in the journey of India's rise to great power status. Great power is international relations terminology. And this is an epochal moment in every sense in that journey.
Mr. Sengupta, I'll request you to stay on with us. There's lots more to ask you and to know from you. As of now, we're just going to cut across to our correspondent and my colleague, Molly Gambhir, who's right there in Ayodhya. Molly, finally, we're connecting with you, and excellent to hear from you. We want to really get to know what is the flavor over there, what is the entire atmosphere like, and talk to us about, you shared a lot of visuals earlier about, while you were entering the city and how there's so much security and just the overall celebrations. Talk to us more about that.
Indeed, Shivan, where I'm standing right now is very close to what we will be witnessing in just a short while from now as a part of the consecration ceremony, which will be witnessed by not just the nearly 7,000 attendees who will be there in person, but it is a ceremony that is highly anticipated, to say the least, that will be watched by millions from across India and also from around the world. As we've been discussing, this has already been called a global phenomenon. But first, let me just get you a sense of what things are looking like over here in Ayodhya. The kind of build-up that we've been talking about in terms of the mood, in terms of the jubilation, the celebrations, this right here is what the temple city looks like. The flower decorations that you see here, by the way, are just a sample of what we've seen all through Ayodhya yesterday as well. In fact, the entire route towards Ayodhya from Lucknow is dotted with such decorations, banners, posters to welcome the devotees and the dignitaries, along with security personnel, of course. Remember, a series of networks of CCTV cameras, around 10,000 CCTV cameras have been deployed, a series of command centers put in place as well to ensure that the security is tightly put in place. As you can see over here, this entire stretch is the arterial route that is where we can see devotees who have been passing by as well, chanting slogans and just sharing their enthusiasm to be a part of this historic event. In fact, some of them have been walking hundreds of kilometers over days just to be close to Ayodhya and then be a part of the ceremony and then get to be inside the Ram temple from tomorrow onwards. Remember, today being the consecration ceremony, just to remind our viewers, is the day when the ceremony means that the temple will be officially dedicated to the people at around 10:25 a.m. Just a while from now, the Indian Prime Minister will be arriving here at the Ayodhya airport, and from there onwards, he...
Right, well, Molly, thank you so much for bringing us all those ground updates. Of course, do stay on with us. Just a few other details for our viewers. Prime Minister Modi will be reaching the temple around 11 a.m. and will remain inside the complex for about 3.5 hours for the ceremony. And of course, another important factoid here is that music instruments from about 25 states will be played for nearly 2 hours. That's to produce the Mangal Dhwani.
The Mangal Dhwani before the start of the rituals at 12:20 p.m. That's essentially when the consecration ceremony will happen. The entire city has been decorated with over 2,500 quintals of flowers. A sense of that, of course, that Molly was trying to bring to us. You know, there are flowers all over the city. And as of now, of course, we have Molly who's there on ground and will be bringing us the latest.
And of course, Mr. Sengupta, who's been waiting very patiently. Mr. Sengupta, thank you so much for staying on with us. Now, in fact, I want to get your opinion on this as a historian. What impact do you believe the Ram Mandir's consecration will have on the field of Indian historiography?
There are 2 or 3 very important things to understand here. Number one, the Ram Mandir, the creation of the Ram Mandir gives a sense of, you know, even at independence, there was a consensus in India that India is a secret geography. This consensus existed even between deeply antithetical characters, at least that's how we see them today, like Nehru and Savarkar. They agreed that India was a secret geography. But the secret geography notion of India's nationhood has got diluted somewhere, and there are many reasons for that. We don't have time to go into all that. But I think this reaffirmation that India is sacred geography, it has a particular, you know, sanctity to its geography, that is being re-emphasized in a very public way. The other thing that's important, especially perhaps for your viewers, one must mention, look, the story of Lord Ram and the Ramayana is not only an Indian heritage. It is a heritage across many cultures. Southeast Asia, many of you might know across Southeast Asia, other parts of Asia, including, you know, I was part of this project to publish this book, which has just been announced today by a junior of mine from Oxford, who's written this brilliant book on Ram, A Global History. And, you know, the book talks about, and I want to mention here, the book talks about, you know, how in Southall, for instance, you know, women asked for equality and justice using the story of Prabhu Shri Ram. And that's just one example. There are countless examples, you know, from Bali to Burma, from Sri Lanka to, you know, Cambodia. The story of Ramayana and Ram is a moral and ethical framework. It's a global heritage. It's a global intellectual and cultural heritage. Sadly, we have never been able to project it quite in that manner. And I think that the beginning of that you're seeing today. And I think there will be far more understanding and projection of the Ramayana as global intellectual heritage, which is really what it is.
Mr. Sengupta, I also wanted to just, ask you for more, if you could elaborate further on one of the quotes that I read on your X account. You had recently made an appeal to everyone to refrain from using the term idol and while referring to Sri Ram in the temple. And I wanted to ask you, why do you feel so, and what is the right terminology as per you, if you can share more on that?
What is an idol? It's when the Europeans came into account with what they called native cultures. They described everything that the native culture, quote unquote, considered sacred as idols. Why idols? Because in the Abrahamic worldview and framework, there is the true God, so to speak, and everything else is superstition. Everything else is, derogatory and superstition. And therefore an idol is basically just some native image, as it were, made out of, of material things. But that's not how those cultures, and, I'm reminded here of Hamid Dawashi's wonderful essay on Can Non-Europeans Think? And philosophy is what the white people do, right? Religion is what the white people do, what Abrahamic cultures do, everything else is idol, everything else is superstition, everything else is native culture. That's the framework in which the word idol came up. But to our culture, this is, we consider it the deity. Pran prathishtha is done to essentially invoke the Lord to come and reside in the deity. And the deity is, worshipped. If you know how deities are worshipped, there's an entire elaborate ritual from waking up the deity to shayana, rituals where you put the deity to sleep every night, exactly like you would behave with a revered family member. And therefore, deities are extremely precious to us. So therefore, I don't think we should use this cut and paste colonial framework to understand our own selves anymore. We must stop it. It's been, more than 75 years. We must understand ourselves on our own terms. And one of the things to do that is to drop this terrible word idol and start using deity. And of course, Indian languages, you will know, in Hindi, we call it murti, or, if in other languages, we call it vigraha. So therefore, the problem with India, let me conclude by saying the problem with India is that our entire framework, forget how we behave in day-to-day life. Our entire framework of thinking is borrowed, cut, paste from the colonial gaze. We never gave that up. And that's why we cannot understand our very selves. How will we understand the world? Right. We don't even understand ourselves.
All right. Well, Mr. Sengupta, thank you so much for your clarification on the correct terminology here. And before we let you go, I have to ask you, as someone who's deeply engaged in Indian history, current affairs, what are your personal reflections on witnessing this momentous event?
I have long argued, and it is one of my next big project that I'm working on, is on India as a civilizational state. And, looking at this, there are two responses, and let me quickly tell you both. One is a deeply profound, personal, intimate reflection as a Hindu, right? As a practicing Hindu, which is one of great devotion and, a greatly moving experience, which is a very internal experience. The other is external. The other is an historian. I feel that this transformation of India as a civilizational state is a very necessary state. We've never had a grand narrative for our rise as a great power. And I think civilizational state gives us a framework to build that narrative, grand narrative, to rise towards great powerhood in the world. And that's very important.
All right, Mr. Sengupta, thank you so much for joining in, sharing all your insights, clarifying so many things, and of course, sharing all your knowledge on the subject. And of course, today is a day that everyone celebrates, and we are looking forward to the ceremony as it's supposed to take place in a couple of hours from now. We will be in touch for more. Thank you so much for joining in.
Thank you.
Shri Ram Jaya Ram Jaya Jaya Ram Shri Ram Jaya